Let's take a look at DEWALT's 20-inch FlexVolt chainsaw. This is model number DCCS677. You can get this as bare tool. You can get it with a 12 amp hour battery or a 15 amp hour battery. The kit with the 15 amp hour battery is going currently at $550. Now you can find that on sale. There's a lot of sales going on right now, usually around 10% off, but is it worth it? That's going to be the question we're going to answer today. Stay tuned. This DEWALT FlexVolt 60 volt chainsaw is absolutely awesome for the right person on that right job. And I need you to stick with me through the specs so you can understand when we have a positive or negative experience in the woods as we're describing it, what we're talking about on this saw. I'll try to be super quick, but the absolute things that I love, the chain brake, very, very positive. It is electric and mechanical. So if you have a kickback situation and it goes forward, it's going to mechanically stop the chain. There is also a chain brake. Here is the 15 amp hour battery. That thing seems massive, but it works well. Here's the chain brake that is on it just with the trigger. Stops the chain very quickly, which is nice and a good safety feature, although when you're moving around, it's also good to put on the mechanical chain brake. Now there is a safety feature or a thumb safety for the trigger. You have to push that down and pull back the trigger. The trigger is not variable speed. I do not miss a variable speed trigger on this saw, and I don't think anyone else will either once you get used to it. The auto oiler is absolutely awesome, puts out a ton of oil. Basically, you're going to get 2 battery charges to 1 container of oil. So it sucks down oil similar to many of my steel chainsaws that I have the oilers turned up all the way on. Chain stays nice and oiled. I love that part. Now, the downside to this, the 20-inch low profile 3/8 inch chain is a DEWALT only purchase. So you're gonna have to find that chain, maybe buy an extra one, but they do throw in the proper file for this chain. And this is here for a reason. That's to keep this chain sharp. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That chain or bar can be changed to an 18-inch. You can go down to a 16-inch, pick up pretty much any Oregon bar, Oregon chain, stay with the 3/8 inch low profile. That's going to be important. When we look at the tool on this saw, it is in the back. It is in there pretty tight. It's kind of out of the way. You're not going to hit it, but if you were to lose this tool, it is black. You're not going to find it in the woods, or it would be pretty tough. It would be nice if they would have made this silver. That might stick out a little bit more, but the placement is decent, and I think it's going to stay in there for the long term, but try to keep track of this tool. You have 2 studs up front like any other professional grade saw. You can loosen them up, adjust your tensioner here, get the chain tension right, tighten this guy back up. We will take this apart at a little bit later time in the video so you can see on the inside. Chip extraction with this is absolutely awesome. You can see the chips going out the back. Comfort in build quality is top notch. I love everything about this saw. It just leaves me wanting that little bit more. So I had this chainsaw in the woods for 4 days, and I am working in all hardwoods basically. Most of it is all deadfall. So you're going to see some spots that are a little more rotten than others. Some of it is going to be completely good because it fell recently. You'll notice what is very solid and what is not by the speed of the saw going through in the looks of the wood. It'll be very, very clear. This saw on day 1 performed so outstanding that I was blown away. I never had a single cutout. I didn't have any issues. I was going through cutting a lot of wood, maybe a little bit smaller wood while I was going through, but you could see this thing was just an absolute beast. The downside was the battery does not last that long. You just start to get into cutting and you're out of battery. And that's probably due to A, the hardwoods, and B, cutting just larger timber, trying to test this out. It just didn't have the runtime I wished for, even with this 5 amp hour 60 amp battery. Now, most people are going to call it a 15 amp battery because it's 15 amps at 20 volts, 5 at 60. I longed for a little bit more runtime. Put this dude on the charger, and it takes some serious time with the base charger that comes with this. It's in some cases upwards of 2 hours. So your time is out in the woods, inside for a while. So I'd highly suggest getting a second battery or third, although that adds a lot to the cost. Day 2, I went out, started cutting, and man, I thought I kept this bar out of the dirt, out of everything, but I am cutting wood that is on the ground. So I ended up starting and getting a lot of cutouts right off the bat, which I thought was odd. So first thing I wanted to do, look at the battery. Yep, we're fully charged. Second, took a look at the chain. That's when this included file really came in, because I had some chain that was fairly dull. It still cut really well, but just didn't have that perfect sharpness to it. So I spent 5 minutes, sharpened the chain up, and voila, back in business without all the cutouts. So it's important to keep this chain sharp and really just know what's going on. So you start getting a lot of cutouts, that's not only going to heat up the battery, but it's also going to just slow you down and frustrate you. Keep that chain sharp. With a sharp chain, day 2, I had 0 issues up until the point I got down to 1 bar left on the battery. It was very noticeable at that point that I couldn't push the saw as much without getting a cutout. So anytime that I knew that I was getting a cutout with the chain sharp, I knew I was low on battery, and I didn't have much time left to really use the saw. Again, the saw had a pretty short runtime in that use. Now, as I moved on, I started to do more work with what I was cutting down rather than more testing, and that was a lot better on the saw, as it gave it time to kind of recover from the big cuts and or not heat up a little bit. The battery, when you're doing multiple large, longer cuts, can get quite warm, and even when you're done with the battery at the end of the day and it's completely discharged, you'll notice this 15 amp hour battery is quite warm. But the saw continues to run perfectly through everything as long as the chain's sharp and as long as I have more than 1 bar on the battery. I have absolutely no issues. I absolutely love this saw. I love that the bar's a little longer. In some cases, it doesn't make me bend over as far. It just really fits and gives me that feel of a larger gas saw. It gives me the same speed. The amount of chips that come out the back really gives me that comfort knowing I'm actually cutting through wood quickly, and it maybe gives me that feeling I'm cutting through the wood faster than what I might, be actually. If I had a gas chainsaw, I would be getting large chips out of that wood. I run a much more aggressive chain. In here, I'm getting a lot of little chips, and it makes it look like it's just barreling through the wood. And in some cases it is. This is going to give you the performance of a mid-grade 50cc gas chainsaw. There's no doubt about that. The kicker of it is you get about a 1/4 tank of gas with this battery in comparison. So that's the big downside to me, along with maybe the chain being a proprietary chain. When you're really using this saw, it is amazing. It's 12 pounds without the battery in it. It's very well balanced. It's very well built. Everything here feels good, feels of high quality. I just wish it had a touch more runtime. And the few things that I really thought would maybe kind of tip the scales, it doesn't have a variable speed trigger. Don't care. Even while trimming up smaller trees, just kind of getting things away, didn't bother me a bit, didn't even notice it. The trigger is nice and smooth. The safety on it works excellent. I did find myself pushing down on that trigger safety with my thumb constantly, and that seems kind of a normal feeling based off of me using a lot of battery operated string trimmers. That may be a one thing if you were to use this for a long period and had multiple batteries, that your thumb might get a little sore, or you'd have to learn to stop pushing down on it after you pull the trigger. But so many times you're doing it so often that you just push down and realize that you're just constantly holding it down even as you're going through that 20-second cut through a log. Either way, this thing pretty much rocks its way through every bit of the tests except for runtime. For the price of this saw, I think it's great that it comes with the case. You have a place for the battery up top, so you can keep an extra battery in it or take the battery out of the saw in order to store it. There's a place for the charger here, and if we look on the inside, I stored it in here for all the charges. This is all the oil that I got out. Very, very little. And when we look at the saw, I actually think it's leaking out from me spilling the oil, not actually from the auto oiler or from the side of the saw. The case is awesome. I have a little bit of trouble getting the file in its place. I'm just gonna have to work and trim away a little bit of the plastic. There's a little bit too much around there. Other than that, I can't complain about the case, and it's really nice just to have this case with it. The saw itself, I can't complain about either. If we take a look at it, the one thing that I constantly noticed in the field, I could not tell how much oil I had in the saw because this was constantly covered in something. All you had to do was wipe it off. Not a big deal, but that was always covered in something. You could see there's some oil here that's got some sawdust around it. I didn't want to clean it up at all because I kind of wanted to give you guys the look of what it's going to be like after it's been well used. The inside of the saw here, fairly clean, but with that said, when we take a look at the battery, right inside here, there is quite a bit of small wood chips and just sawdust. This needs to be cleaned. Keep that cleaned. It'll help with the contacts on everything. You just need to make sure that this part of it is going to be set and clean. Filling this up with oil, I didn't find any issue with that. This comes right out of the way, a little plastic retainer there. It's perfect. Like I said, enough oil that is in there for 2 battery charges. So carry some oil with you if you have multiple batteries. If we pull this tool out, take a look inside here. Design of this, absolutely awesome. I did have these nuts come loose on me once while I was in the field. Not hard. It wasn't a big issue. I could tell because the bar started moving up and down just slightly. So we take this cover off, make sure that you keep everything in here, but you can see we do have some sawdust on the inside. That's probably mostly due to a lot of the oil that's coming through. I'd highly recommend using a very good quality oil on this saw. Looking inside here, it's pretty clean for the amount of cutting that I did, and I'm really impressed with how everything works. You can see your tensioner that's sitting here, that's going to be this nut, but overall, this really is an awesome saw. It just doesn't have a ton of runtime. So if you're looking at getting this with the 12 amp hour battery, I would highly suggest not. I would go with the 15 for the extra 50 bucks that it's gonna cost you, and just spend the money because you're going to need that runtime, and you're not going to want to have the amount of heat buildup that you might get with that 12 amp hour battery, because you get quite a bit of heat already with the 15 amp hour battery. Taking this apart in the field is not much of an issue. I just wouldn't want to lose anything. These little, there's washers on the inside here that keep everything together. Just make sure that all that stuff is here. It is black again, so in the woods, if you lose something, it is hard to find. This is not a normal tool that you would see. It is more flat, kind of easier to drop or misplace. That's one of those things to me that I wouldn't mind having a standard tool that is a scrunch, but here's your tensioner. Pretty simple. Everything here is easy to use. Got that maybe just a touch too tight. I really love the saw. I just wish I had a bit more runtime. This saw has the ergonomics, the build quality, the power, and just about everything here to make 99% of the people who use this very happy. It's one downside. It's going to be runtime, and that downside is actually just runtime. It's not going to be the amount of cutouts, because if you keep this chain sharp and you keep the battery clean and ready to go, you won't have that many cutouts. Now, if you constantly are running with the 12 amp hour battery, or you decide you want to go to a smaller battery, you will have issues, and you really can't. This is a 12 or 15 amp hour battery only, and I'd highly recommend the 15 amp hour battery. But if you're expecting to take this saw, cut down a full tree, and buck everything, it is not going to happen. You will not have the runtime to do so unless it's a small tree. So that's where I limit this saw to the homeowner who wants to just cut down some deadfall or have something to just clean up some storm damage, has the time, just in case they have to recharge the battery, to do so, and is not in a rush. And with that said, If you're moving around slow and just cleaning things up, you'll have a lot of runtime out of this, because it seems like if it rests, it just lasts a bit longer. The heat inside this battery over time, if you're constantly charging, gets fairly intense. And you may not notice it while it's actually in the saw, but after you're done cutting with this and you take it out, even 5 minutes later, that heat starts to dissipate out of this battery and the battery gets fairly warm. That might lead to a thermal delay when you're charging it. So with that standard charger, or even with a fast charger, you might have to wait for the battery to cool down. All of my use with this was in freezing or close to freezing temperatures. That may make a difference. A 90-degree day may change this saw 100%. It may get hot very fast. I can't answer that. I've only had this in cold weather. Using good chain oil, I think, is a must. I'm using a DEWALT biodegradable chain oil, which is very interesting in itself, but it's a good high quality. I use that in all my steels also. It seems to keep things working very well, especially with this chain. It kept it very well oiled, and it didn't have any issues with clogging up much of the chips inside of here. I think if you were to use something that was a little bit thicker or wasn't as good of quality, you might have issues of things building up in here, because there are a lot of chips that run back in here and out the bottom. This saw, I really have to say, is awesome. Things I really thought were not going to be my gig, like not having a variable speed trigger, didn't really affect the saw use at all. In fact, I never even thought about it while using it. The thing that came back time after time was, this is a big battery, which it's not when you look at other batteries out there in larger 60 or 80 volt saws, but I want more runtime. That's the only thing I could wish out of this saw. I've got all the power, I've got everything I need. I can deal with the chain, I can put an 18-inch bar in this, I can get chains anywhere I want. I just want more runtime. Let me know your thoughts below. As always, give us a like in this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.